right, everybody, welcome back to an American Discussion podcast. I am one of your hosts, Michael, and with me, as always, is Drew. How are you today, Drew?
I'm doing good, Mike. A whole lot of working.
Not a whole lot going on.
Oh, this weekend we did do something pretty sweet. So you obviously haven't seen Tate since he was a little boy.
Right.
But we got his mullet cleaned up this weekend. Him and Dad went out and got a haircut together. And
Dude, the ladies at
nice.
the barber shop were just drooling over this little boy.
They loved him.
One lady even moved her entire station down next to the chair that I was going to sit in so that we could be next to each other so he didn't freak out. And, dude, he behaved so well. I was so proud of him.
Oh, that's awesome. Was that his first haircut?
No,
I think his third. His first one, Sam just took it in and got trimmed so it was out of his eyes.
the second one we did a home haircut to give him the mullet. And then we took him in for a haircut for that to clean that up after, like the next day, because we fucked it up. And then this one was to clean that out. I think he's got one more good one until the mullet's really, really grown in. So we're following Massey tradition on that.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, we've done the same with my son Miles. Tried to give him some haircuts at home, but yeah, we usually end up taking him out every few months now to get it cleaned up. We do kind of short and clean on the sides, and then leave it long so the curls come through on the top.
Yeah, you got that nice curly hair though.
You know. Yeah, if we grew out the back, I'm sure he'd have a nice mullet too.
Oh, I bet he'd have that classic Toby Keith mullet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the curls.
Do anything else over the weekend?
Cut the grass. I was gonna check on the bees, but I decided not to.
We're at the end of towards the end of the season. I'm probably gonna close up second week of October. And every time I open the hive, you break apart what's called propolis. Essentially, you can think of propolis as like mortar between bricks for bees, where they go in and they fill all the gaps around the frames and any gaps in the hive that allow airflow in. They close all that up, just so it's less stuff for them to have to protect. And so every time you go in there, you break all that apart, so you can pull all the frames individually apart. And my last inspection, I wasn't super happy with how they were doing as far as their production levels. So I figured I usually give them about 2 weeks now, and this time I'm going to give them 3 weeks in between checks just to let them work strictly on honey collection and any additional comb building they might do. It's not likely because it's late in the season, but I wanted to be able to let them have time to build out and get some stuff put together instead of fixing all my fuck-ups.
And then do they like hibernate over the winter?
No, so they actually do something really interesting. So they're alive and relatively cognizant. Obviously, how would you measure what their thought pattern is in that period? But what they actually do is they create a little swarm inside the hive where they create a ball of bees around the queen, and they just vibrate their bodies all winter to regulate temperature within the hive. So the colony actually just heats the whole hive. Now, since we are in Michigan and it gets a little colder, I built a hive that has 2 inches of sheep wool insulation all the way around it in order to keep some of that warmth in. And when I close it up for winter, I'll put more on top, and I'll put some... I'll close some entrances so mice and shit can't get in there when they're trying to survive over winter. But like I said, that's going to be October.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I love it. Beekeeping's been super, super dope.
Nice.
What about you? What did you get into?
That's a great hobby. So this weekend, I kind of did a lot. So, my son was sick towards the end of the week. So
doing
that
better
changed
now,
our
I hope.
plans a little bit. Oh yeah, he's doing much better now. Still got kind of a cold, but I think it was Wednesday night. Tuesday or Wednesday of this last week, we had to take him into the doctor. He was having some trouble breathing, so nothing to mess around with there. But they got him on some medication, and he turned around, and now just kind of getting over the cold now, or whatever it was. But we were originally going to go to a concert on Friday night, and then drive a little over an hour after the concert was over to go up to a music festival It's kind of like a bluegrass festival. It's called Wheatland Music Festival.
Okay.
Honestly, I have no idea how we never heard of it growing up, because that's right up my alley.
Because we were in Saginaw
it was-
and it was bluegrass.
Yeah, that's true. But like, I mean, we went to Common Ground, and
So I don't
we would
mean
find
that-
all kinds of stuff like that.
I don't mean that as like we can't listen to bluegrass because it's in Saginaw. I meant that more as local radio stations typically wouldn't cover that because it's not a huge market in our area.
No, I totally agree with you, and I've never seen advertising for it anywhere. It has to just be kind of like a word of mouth thing, and obviously you can find it online if you look up music concert dates or festivals or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just surprised I never heard of it, because right up my alley. It was I feel like I would have came across it in the last 12 years or something like that, but didn't until I met my wife, and she was all about it, and she's been waiting to go since we got together, basically. So we ended up going to the concert on Friday. It was Sierra Farrell. Anybody out there listening, if you haven't heard her, give her a listen. Probably my favorite artist of the last 4 years. So been waiting a long time to go to that show, and it was amazing. So if you have a chance to grab some tickets on her tour, I highly recommend it. But then we came home after that, made sure my son was doing okay, and stayed the night, and then woke up the next morning, and one of their grandparents came over to watch them for Saturday night, so we ended up going up pretty early on Saturday, and then spent the whole night, and then most of the day Sunday up there as well.
So did the kids go with you, or did you leave those at home with grandma and grandpa? Or
Oh no, we left them at home this time, but there is a lot of stuff for kids to do up there, so next year we'll probably bring them up for a day, and then send them, either drive them back or have somebody come pick them up.
yeah,
I don't know if a music festival atmosphere is great for
no,
having kids around, especially when it's thousands of people all packed together camping and stuff.
we have a guy at work that obviously I'm not gonna name any names, but he takes his young teenage daughter to he just took her to the Gathering of the Clowns or whatever it's called with ICP.
Yeah, that seems like definitely a vibe, first of all, but also, yeah, bringing a teenage daughter to that thing,
Probably not the best idea.
they have to know what kind of stuff goes on there.
Oh, he's
so,
well aware.
maybe that's the kind of thing he enjoyed in his youth, and he wants to share that with his family. So.
Yeah, I'm not
I
gonna do
don't know.
illegal drugs with my kids either. So
Yeah. Well,
I mean-
even if your kids run off and find their own thing to do, you probably know what kind of stuff they're doing.
oh yeah, that doesn't mean I have to do it with them.
Oh no, true, but yeah. I'll just leave it at that. I'm probably not gonna bring my kids and let them stay overnight.
Yeah.
Even though my kids are a little younger than that.
Oh, definitely not. I don't even think.
But yeah, we had a great weekend. Yeah, and then took yesterday to get a nap in and recharge our batteries.
Those afternoon
So
naps
it was
are
good.
where it's at, buddy.
Oh yeah, we actually had all four of us and the dog piled all on the couch. We have a nice big ottoman, and we kind of shoved it right up against the corner of the couch, and
Made a giant bed.
Yep, everybody was sleeping all together.
That's awesome. I love those days.
Yep. All right, so what are we talking about this week, Drew?
Yeah, so this spurred from, I think, a topic that you and I, in our text conversations, we kind of touch on, but we never really go at it as far as our opinions on it. It is a very charged issue politically, I think, much less so now than it was a couple of years ago. But it's still relevant, I think. And it's going to be the
whether or not the 2020 election was rigged, I guess is the word. I don't particularly like that word, but I haven't figured out a better one to use there. But I think a good thought exercise for us to do, to keep us honest and see, how we feel about things. I'd like us both to give our opinion on what we think of it, if you're all right with that. And then at the end,
like in the beginning,
Yeah.
before we talk about any of the timeline and facts and all that.
yeah, and then as we go through it and have our conversation, I like to recap and see if we've changed at all or if we've, maybe fortified our previous position. Spoiler alert, that tends to be what I did on this. But I think it'll be cool. Just kind of see where we've gone from it. If we change anything, or if maybe new information comes to light, because I know you know a lot of stuff that I don't know, and probably vice versa.
That's an interesting thought exercise, and I'm happy to go first if you want, unless you want to kind of frame the discussion here by telling me your opinion. I don't know the bounds you're trying to stay in, I guess.
So as far as boundaries, I'm trying to keep it within, I would say, the 2016 election through present day. And I think that I'm personally going to quantify the way in which I think it potentially was rigged, whether it be through administrative means, through influential means, through potential judicial means, things of that nature, and kind of go from there. Obviously, present day stuff cannot be used applicably retroactively. So for an example for what I mean on that is, we can't use information that is from an event that occurred after the election date, right? So if the event occurred, man, it's really hard to frame what I'm trying to say.
I think what you're trying to get at is the January 6th thing. So
No,
trying to keep feelings about that out of it. Is that what you're getting at?
I'm fine with keeping that in if it's used in reference to what we think occurred in the election itself. You know what I mean?
Okay.
So if we think,
yeah, no, I don't necessarily think that had an influence on the election itself. I do think it's.
But I think it can shed light on other
in a
events.
discussion about the election.
Yes,
but,
I agree with that, and that's what I mean. Obviously, the things that happened on January 6th, I don't think are applicable, but it can shed light on things that were previously believed and that may have reconfirmed or that may have disavowed or whatever. I also think information that came out after the fact about events that happened during that time frame are also fair game. Just because we didn't know about them then didn't mean they didn't occur. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, yeah, I'm still happy to kind of share my opinion first. I'm going to talk about the 2016 election and then the 2020 election. Is that kind of where you were getting with that?
Yeah, so I'm fine with that.
All right, sweet. So the 2016 election, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. From what I remember about that election and the lead up to it, there was and now this part is proven to be true from after the fact. We know about it. We know it happened. So there was evidence of a large Russian state-sponsored influence campaign trying to, especially on social media, trying to influence people's opinions on the election. Essentially, trying to influence opinion online in favor of Donald Trump. And I guess kind of the Republican Party and viewpoint as a whole, or conservative viewpoint rather. But the results of that, honestly, I don't know if it contributed to everybody picking up the picking up the MAGA hats and everything, the rise of that whole movement. I tend to think it wasn't. I tend to think that was really kind of a grassroots thing. Like,
I would
people
agree
just
with
latched onto that, and they loved it,
Yeah, it was a symbol of revolt, essentially, I think.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, like, people were feeling, dissatisfaction, which is, pretty typical for
Every
the
election.
general societal feeling after, a certain party has been in power for 8 years consecutively. Because no matter what you think about the politician going into an election, they're probably not going to, significantly improve your day-to-day life just by being in office. That takes hard work on your own part as well, and, a little bit of luck. So, but that is to say, I think there was an outside attempt to influence our election, and we have seen this in the years since. We've outed several campaigns that were trying to influence people online for both sides, both parties. Like, even in this current election, we have evidence that there are, other states trying to influence our election for both sides. So that's really the big thing about 2016. I know we've touched on in private conversation some of Hillary Clinton's action, or I guess words after the election. I imagine you're going to talk about that later, so I can kind of skip that.
Yeah, I'll touch on it. I don't think it was a critically important rule, but continue.
No. I tend to think that was pretty minor, although we did have a lot of people on the liberal side protesting after the election, saying, not my president and all that, which I just want to be clear, that was never my opinion. I did not support that movement. I think the election was as fair as an election you're going to get, so even if I didn't agree with the man or vote for him, that's the guy that we elected as president of the United States. And I mean, at the time I was also in the military, so that was going to be my boss no matter what. And then as far as the 2020 election, I also tend to think that there was outside influence campaigns going on. And, again, I don't particularly think that influences the way that people are going to vote any more than, real people online sharing memes and, saying about or talking about how outraged they are at such and such, and, can you believe this sensationalist journalism? I mean, it's all over the place. I don't think it would have meaningfully impacted the election, and say a more than a percentage spread, right? So,
I don't even think it would have gotten that much. I think a percentage is gracious, but
no. So as far as were they free and fair elections, I think yes, and even in the face of these campaigns that have been uncovered recently. I think this one will be as well. Although, time will tell, right?
Okay.
Hindsight's 2020. So
for sure. So
yeah, that's kind of my position.
Okay. My general going into this, and this is going to be a little bit tainted, this opinion, because of the research I've done since. But I'm going to try and be as honest as I can with my previous opinion, and where I think the information has led me. So. One of these things in here I already know now is false. I've since learned that was completely false, and it was just a misunderstanding on my behalf, and I took it as evidence. So that one thing would be gerrymandering. I think that I thought originally, first and foremost, I do think there was an extent at which the 2020 election was rigged. I was going to mention 2016 as well, but you pretty much covered everything, and I think that was a pretty fair description of what happened in 2016, and I appreciate your acknowledgement of that. I think that a lot of Democrat or Democrat-leaning people that I've had this conversation with tend to try to sweep that under the rug like it never happened, and that Trump's January 6th was the only occurrence of election denial, which, as I'll get into later, definitely not the case.
As far as the Not My President protest?
Yes. Yeah. I think that was a good.
Okay.
I think that was a very fair bringing to light of wrongdoing on a side that you tend to be politically aligned with. I think that was really good, by the way. So I'm not going to keep drawing over that. I also thought that the Steele dossier and Russian collusion media presence negatively tainted the view of the political opposition based on things that we now know and a lot of people suspect at the time were, if not blatantly false, were being alleged with unverifiable sources. So I think that was a big one. I also thought that social media fuckery, for lack of a better word, did a very similar thing, where it was heavily biased based on government interference to certain candidates. Lastly, I think a lot of Republicans want to argue though about ballot stuffing and ballot harvesting and poll centers were not counting adequately, which in some cases I guess was true, but they immediately remedied the action. And I just don't think that's the case. I think that as far as the administrative carrying out of the election was free and fair. At least to the point where any fraud is what we typically see with fraud of past elections, and nothing that would have passed us over the threshold of changing the outcome.
And I would absolutely agree with that. I think that both the elections were held in that manner. And I just to, kind of paint my argument here a little bit. I have not done any, extensive research into this topic in preparation for this episode. So my opinion is pretty much clean from just what I've seen and my opinions over the last, 8 years.
So another thing, just for our audience, I want to point out that was not from me trying to do a gotcha, right? We knew, I think, at the end of the last episode what this topic was going to be. So, just so we don't get anybody yelling at me that I did a gotcha. That wasn't the intent.
No, absolutely not. And just to clarify, we kind of like to do our topics in that way, where one person will do a bunch of research and then present that to the other person, and we'll kind of discuss that. And we've learned a lot doing that, and we've done it quite a few times now at this point, and I think we've really only had good experiences doing it that way.
I agree.
Whereas if we both do a bunch of research, you're potentially opening yourself up to confirmation bias, and then it just
becomes
argue at each other for a full hour,
locking horns, rams for the whole time. So no, I agree. I think it's a better way to do it. But just so everybody's clear as far as how it goes, it's not. We have no ill intent trying to do gotchas. So that being said, I want to get over into the research I did. And kind of go over some background real quick. One important thing that a lot of people don't realize, I think, is that I couldn't find a single federal law. I'm not saying there's one out there. I just couldn't find it. That allows for one party to challenge an election and cause either recounts or overturning of ballots or whatever the case. All I found was state legislature on it. That's because the federal government has endowed the states with the power to regulate their elections. So, out of the states that I found, 43 allow the losing candidate to petition for a recount, which is something that I think a lot of people gave Donald Trump a hard time for, was challenging the election. And I don't see anything wrong with that, personally. I think that any candidate should be able to challenge the results of any election they were a part of, pretty much bar none, because I think that's part of the democratic process, and I think that is important to government transparency for us to be able to check that.
I'll cut in here real quick just to say I totally agree with that, and I think a candidate challenging the the way that an election was held in a particular state, totally fair, especially if they have reasonable grounds to believe that it was, there was some sort of irregularity going on. Like, you're using these type of ballot machines, and they're, known to throw false positives at, a certain rate for, say the right-hand side or the left-hand side, whatever, something like that, totally fair, But yeah, I'll let you continue. I just wanted to say I totally agree with that statement.
Yeah, no worries at all. And that's something I didn't really mention because it's something we don't have a whole lot of information on, the voting machine thing. But it is something I'm more than willing to talk about briefly. It's just not part of my presentation. So, of the 15 states out of our beautiful union have an automatic recount, which, again, I think is a good thing. I think that that's within a certain margin of win, by the way. That's not every election gets counted again, but every election that falls within a certain margin, they're all slightly different, so I didn't see it pertinent, but 15 states have an automatic recount within a certain margin. Ohio law is an interesting one, where they allow for a recount based off of a signed petition of 25 voters. That's all it takes in the state of Ohio to challenge an election.
Wow.
That's wild. That's a fun fact that I found. I was like, that's crazy. But that being said, there's also a Supreme Court case, Bush v. Gore, that allowed for a recount outside of normal conditions. That gets a little legalese for us in this 1 hour and change podcast, so I didn't want to get too deep into that. I just want to point out that in general, there's pretty agreed upon conditions for a recount, margin threshold, stuff like that. Obviously, if you got blown out 15 to 80, you're not going to get percentages. You're not going to get a recount. But there are certain extenuating circumstances that can trigger other than normal condition challenges. A list of the challenged elections, not to include 16 and 20. 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes versus Samuel Tilden. 1884, Grover Cleveland versus James Blaine. 1916, Woodrow Wilson versus Charles Hughes. I am going to take this opportunity, like I take every opportunity, to talk about Woodrow Wilson. I think he's the worst president to ever serve in this nation, and I'd be willing to discuss that with just about anyone that'll listen. Moving on. 1960, you have JFK and Nixon. 2000, Bush v. Gore. That's where that Supreme Court case came out of. It came out of a Florida recount. And then Bush v. Kerry. Kerry did. I count that as a challenge election. He did something similar to Clinton, where he waited to the following day to concede. That's the only reason I include that 2004 one, is because Kerry didn't concede on night of, like his tradition, and Clinton did something comparable. Oddly enough, in the very next lost Democratic election after Bush got out. So that's the two slides I didn't think were going to be very controversial. Next, we get into Russiagate. So this is where I think the foundation of the quote-unquote rigging was. I think that these... Actually, it's not even I think it's fact. The Steele dossier was released in 2017 by a British reporter, Mr. Steele. He was a former intelligence agency within Great Britain. And he basically published a 35-page compilation of, and this is a quote, unverified and potentially unverifiable raw intelligence reports. And he also said it came to the conclusion that it was not, the intent for him was not to establish facts, but a starting point for a further investigation. Then they got into the second running of it, which was actually, so the whole thing was run by Fusion GPS, that whole research into it. And one of the individuals in charge of the study of it, his chief counsel, Matt Geringer, described how in March 2016, Fusion GPS, and this is a quote from the article I read, and I have sourcing in the final if anybody's interested. He said, approached Perkins Coie and said, knowing the Clinton campaign and the DNC or its clients, Geringer inquired whether its clients wished to pay Fusion GPS to quote, continue research regarding then presidential candidate Donald Trump, research that Fusion GPS had conducted for one or more other clients during the Republican primary contest. So what I think this does...
That's interesting.
Yeah, so obviously we all know that politicians research their opponents. I think they would be foolish not to. I also think that that Russiagate was touted by just about every single major corporate news media. So here I'm talking about, your CNNs, your NBC, CNN, MSNBC, CNNs. I think I already said that. I include Fox in that, but they didn't propagate this nearly to the extent that the other ones did. You also had, your more minors, Young Turks, AP, stuff like that, that also pushed the Russiagate. Come to find out, it was false. There was nothing in there that was indictable evidence. I think even if we didn't have the sourcing to know that, right? If we didn't verify it as incorrect, just the fact that Trump has now been indicted with much more frivolous cases, most specifically the one in New York with the corporate finance law that has never been tried that way in the history of the state of New York. The fact that they tried him with that and not anything related to this quote-unquote Russian collusion should be pretty well... it should show pretty well that they didn't find anything of merit to pin Trump to colluding with Russia. There are business ties. I'm not going to try and hide that. There were definitely ties to Russia from Donald Trump. I think that's pretty easily explained by the fact that Donald Trump has multiple real estate holdings in multiple foreign countries all over the globe. And I think that it's kind of unfair to paint a lifetime businessman as a Russian spy because he has a Trump Tower in Russia. Just like
I don't think anybody's painting him as a Russian spy necessarily.
now they're not, but they were definitely painting him as a Russian agent under, and not like secret spy agent for the KGB, but you know what I mean, an agent of a foreign government.
I see what you're saying. Like yes. Prior to the 2016 election?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. They are absolutely painted him that way.
One thing I will say just very quickly
go ahead.
is that I think one of the reasons that Donald Trump was never indicted for that was because of the aftermath of the Mueller report coming out. He was still in office, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then the Department of Justice just never, took the case any further, especially when they declared...
I want to stop you right there,
closed,
because I think that is again proven to be a moot point simply because they have since tried him for alleged crimes that happened 25 years ago, with a witness that couldn't remember facts of the crime or elements of the crime, which is why it was thrown out in criminal court and then moved to a civil venue. So I think that the argument of, well, he was in the presidency at the time is why they didn't charge it is just not true. They have no problem going back and doing that. So I just don't think that holds water personally. Obviously we can all believe different things, but I think that if they had something, they most definitely would have, if not charged him with it, they would have at least released it to sway public opinion. And I think there's ample amounts of evidence of multiple smear campaigns, some justified, some not, against Donald Trump, that they would have taken any option that they could have to do so. Spoiler alert, I also think that there's going to be one coming out now with the polling numbers that just came out. I'm going to go ahead and forecast that there will be another quote-unquote scandal that occurs between here and the election, but we'll see. You wanted to cut in for something, so go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that he was the president during that time frame, right? They had opened this investigation, they closed it, then move on. Joe Biden as president. I think they had more pressing things to worry about. I would have to look into whether or not they could even try him based on how the Department of Justice handled that. But what I do know is that when the Mueller report came out, there was insufficient evidence to link Donald Trump directly to any, personal wrongdoing, like by name Donald Trump to Russian agent, right?
Okay.
However, there were clear links between people on his team. I just think that's a good distinction to make and talk about.
I agree. There are definitely distinctions between people on his links between people on his team, in Russia. I also want to point out that there are links to Joe Biden's staff as well as his son to Ukraine, and that's also swept under the rug as though nothing happened. So I think that both things should be investigated thoroughly, and if there is establishable wrongdoing, that person should be prosecuted on both accounts. Both.
Yes, absolutely.
You see what I'm saying?
I 100%. Bottom line, I agree with you there, and I think the Ukraine and Hunter Biden situation is a future podcast topic that will be one of my topics. So
yeah, I'm definitely interested
we'll
in
talk
that.
about that later in depth.
Yes. So I just say that to say I don't think that we can say Trump's a Russian agent because his staff has links to Russia. If we can't then say Biden is a Ukrainian agent because he was in charge of U.S. policy on Ukraine and his son happened to be on the board of a company that he was not qualified to be on, and somehow he's not an agent. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how you can get A plus B in one and not the other.
I think there's some pretty clear differences, and we can discuss that in
Sure.
that next episode. But perhaps my opinion will change on that one when I do a deep dive. Like you said you had some opinion change on this one.
Yeah. So next, I don't really remember where we are in this. Let me check real quick. Okay. So next was the Mueller report. We've already discussed that a lot. Again, there, like you just said, there was no definitive links between Trump and Russian government, right? As far as overthrowing the election, which were the claims levied. And another thing I want to mention is the severity in which the media portrayed the situation. When we look back on it, is not the same consideration that we think it was now. Multiple occurrences. One, if you infer that a presidential candidate is working with Russia to overthrow U.S. elective procedure, that is treason, right? So this is a crime with a punishment of death in America, the highest punishment. Obviously, they can punish with other things, but up to and including firing squads. That's a pretty lofty accusation to throw around without solid proof, and I think that is a huge part of what changed the public opinion on Donald Trump at the time, and I don't think anyone ever shook that. I think that's a problem with corporate media today as a whole. I think it's you don't have to be right; you have to be first, right? It's crazy.
And I will echo that sentiment. Saying I think sensationalism in journalism, obviously, it's kind of a tradition among journalists. I really thought hard about going to journalism school when I went to college, and unfortunately that was right in the midst of the death throes of the newspaper. So most of the journalism schools were shutting down for a couple of years to revamp their programs towards the internet. But I think that was also really kind of the start of the internet taking off as a journalism medium, and everything is clickbait and come see my ads on my website. And TV news media was already like that, so then you just get this I don't want to say echo chamber, but for lack of better words, kind of this reverberation between the two, and now everybody's vying for your attention, and they just want to throw out the hottest, most tear-jerking or outraging or sensationalist story that they can, trying to grab attention.
Yeah, and I don't think we're gonna be out of the midst of that for a while. I think that's gonna continue until something crashes and burns. And that's just my opinion. But until there's a reason for them to change, they're not going to. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So back to the Mueller report. The second volume of the report was addressing the alleged obstruction of justice, and there was no proof to show that Trump had tried to obstruct justice of him being essentially convicted of crimes of collusion or whatever the case may be. So both volumes from the Mueller report had no evidence that could link Trump to Russiagate or anything like that, which I think is important as far as how much the media pushed that down our throats. I remember seeing it every day. The Steele dossier, we're right there. We're right around the corner. We have ironclad evidence that proves he did it, and then we got nothing as a country as far as any evidence at all. To this day, we still do not have any verifiable evidence that Donald Trump did that, and they did drag his name through the mud for 4 years on that, which I think is one of the ways that they rigged the election in the court of public opinion. Again, I do not think it was administratively rigged, but we'll get into that a little bit further. Another thing that I think that they... You know what? I'll get into that later. Next thing I want to get into is unjust social media. And this is where I think the bulk of my rigging argument comes from. Because I think it's the most provable at this time. And I think it has the most eyeballs attached to it, right? So, I can say that corporate media plastered Russiagate all over. And they put it all over their platforms, such as, nighttime shows or talk shows or their news broadcasts, whatever the case may be. Those broadcasts don't even shine a light to the number of viewers that social media has. Not even kind of close. I do think that it had a critical... it was the first page that they turned to demonize and bastardize Trump, but I don't think that it was the most critical. First, I want to talk about Twitter. This is also where the bulk of my research is. So, first I want to talk about Twitter. Twitter has admitted to... And most of my Twitter information comes from the Twitter files, but there are some from CNN articles and stuff like that. So, Twitter admitted in emails that they're getting large amounts of censorship requests from both parties. That's something that I want to specify. Both parties did it, and that's the thing that I think a lot of Republicans refuse to admit, is that their side has done anything wrong. I think both parties are guilty of that, actually. I think, whether you're talking to a Democrat or a Republican, it tends to be, well, yeah, we did this bad thing, but that guy's way worse because he did this, and he did that too, and he did that too. And they often don't talk about their own party's wrongdoings, which is what I think perpetuates the cycle of wrongdoings, personally. But that being said, with the large amount of censorship requests from both parties, the employees of Twitter were predominantly left-leaning, resulting in a left-leaning bias. And that is also a direct quote from an email from the Twitter files of a C-level executive. I don't remember which one off the top of my head, to be honest with you, and I should have put it in here, but I didn't. But another thing that Twitter was horrible on, and what I think is the linchpin of... I think the most credible source of the quote-unquote rigging of the election was the Hunter Biden laptop story. They immediately reduced the visibility of that post. They also banned the New York Post's account for sharing it, and they made that unshareable so that pretty much no one could see it. This was also in the lead-up days to the election, but we'll get back to that when we get to the Hunter Biden laptop story slide itself. They also reduced the visibility of Donald Trump while he was the sitting president, something that had never been done before. And to my knowledge, hasn't been done since, thankfully. I think that's a good thing that it hasn't been done since, but I also think it's a horrible thing that happened at the time. They also banned Trump. And I'm sure somewhere in the slide we'll bring up the private ownership of that, of it being a private company, but I'm more than happy to touch that as well. There's also evidence of, Yoel Roth, he was the head of trust and safety for Twitter at the time, back when Jack Dorsey owned it and not when Elon Musk owned it, where he met regularly with the FBI for meetings of moderation, how to moderate certain content. Now, in fairness to them, a lot of that was for COVID misinformation. I put heavy quotes on that. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, which I think I've made my point clear on all of these. I think I'm a pretty much a freedom of speech absolutist. I don't think there's anything short of a direct call to violence that should ever be censored. That includes extremists from both sides, right? Antifa rhetoric and KKK rhetoric, I consider them both protected by First Amendment rights.
So you kind of touched on this for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think we would both agree that in America, as horrible as it is, the KKK and, any of these other, groups with ideas that, should be shameful for you to say out loud, they should be able to say that out loud, right?
Absolutely.
And, you shouldn't get punished for saying something, some opinion that we think is horrible. You shouldn't be thrown in jail for putting that in the newspaper or posting that online or saying it out loud at a protest.
Correct.
Right.
Now, go ahead.
What do you think about private companies having a duty to, regulate content on their platform, both from a capitalism perspective and a moral perspective?
Yes. So, like I said, I knew this was coming. I tend to see social media companies now, just because of the monopolistic nature of them, there's really four giants in the arena, right? You got your Meta, so I'm clumping in Instagram, Facebook,
Facebook,
and
Instagram.
Threads, whatever the fuck they call it.
Threads.
Yep.
I think Snapchat also.
Yep.
These days.
I don't even consider Snapchat a media giant, a social media giant. I really don't. I think it's more of a messaging giant, personally. But
yeah, I mean, if you've been on there recently, it's an Instagram, TikTok, YouTube Shorts clone. They're really pushing it, so I can see a lot of young people getting their news from there.
I think
thinking what they
maybe,
think because of those posts.
Maybe pre-TikTok, I would agree with you, but now I don't. And so I think TikTok's another big one. So I think it's TikTok, Meta, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and YouTube are the key four for social media platforms. I think at this point they are. I tend to think of them as global town squares. Now I do realize that federal governments across the world, whether it be ours or the CCP or the Kremlin or North Korea or Great Britain or France or Scotland, all have their own laws, and I get that, right? I understand having to regulate to the extent to at least follow the laws of the nation that it's being operated in. But specifically in the United States, I believe that they should be treated more as public utilities than I think they should be treated as broadcasting platforms, right? So I don't think that...
That's...
Go ahead.
That's a very interesting take.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an opinion that I've never heard before. But as of right now, they're not, right?
Correct.
So they're privately owned companies, and they support their content with ads, right? So these ad companies don't necessarily want to be seen with their ad next to somebody who's espousing hate speech towards whatever minority group or calls for violence.
Absolutely. Let me ask you this, Michael. How many ads do you get on your consumers bill?
How many ads?
Yep.
How many ads do you get on your consumer's bill?
Just the myriad of ads for their own their own services.
Yeah. What about the water company?
I see what you're saying
Yeah.
about being ad
So-
supported, right? But then the government would be funding these things,
and,
right? Or
and the
taxpayers.
constituency, yes. More importantly, the taxpayers. I think that.
But as of
use
right
the
now,
service-
they're not.
No, I
So-
agree.
So
and
what do you?
that's what I literally said was, I think they should be treated as public utilities.
No. I agree, but do you understand why they would, want to take that down, like certain things?
Absolutely. I think that getting into that, though, it also pulls into question GARM, which has been proven to be an illegal operation, that it is a monopolization of the advertising industry, and that was in place for quite some time. So I think that is an issue as well, where one side of the political aisle can weaponize industry. I think it's wrong on pretty much regardless of industry, which industry you're talking about, but it is something that definitely did happen. We have evidence of it, and it literally just got essentially forced out of existence by Congress. So, that being said, I think they should be treated as public utilities strictly because, and I know that's weird coming from a libertarian because I'm a very big supporter of private business. However, I think it's pretty obvious now that the vast majority of at least our country, if not the world, gets their news and their political updates and their information from those sites. And I think catering those to political beliefs is wrong. I think it's different from a publishing house for a couple of reasons. One being, publishing houses regulate what they put on. It has to go through an editorial process. It has to go out, and then it's published by the publishing house. And then the publishing house is held responsible for what they put out, right? A key difference that we have currently between publishing houses and media platforms, such as social media platforms, such as your Metas, your Twitters, your YouTubes, your TikToks, blah, 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 is that they are offered protections. I'd have to look up the exact law, where they're not held accountable for the information that is on their platform, right? With the exception now of Telegram in, I believe, France, which is a different issue. We can talk at another time. I don't think that the Telegram owners should be imprisoned unless there's direct implication of them in a crime. But obviously that information is not out yet.
Yeah, that's true. There are also some other instances of companies being held responsible for hosting content on their platform. One of the big ones is child abuse material. That gets prosecuted a lot if people knowingly host that kind of content in countries all over the world. And I agree, other countries have different laws on this kind of thing than the United States, but these are global companies, so they also have to kind of regulate based on that, unless they want to have that same algorithm go and also geolocate it and then track their users based on location and block it in certain locations, and
so
it becomes a big mess.
Agreed. That's why I think, again, freedom of speech absolutist. I think everything should be allowed. I would put exploitation of minors. Obviously, that's a direct crime of the land in which it's operated in, and that should be charged and tried accordingly, right? I'm not a proponent of fucking child porn hosting sites, obviously.
No,
So-
that was not to imply that you are. And
No. I feel like I should specify that.
That's an example of how things
Could go,
how
yes.
people have been, or I guess companies rather, have been prosecuted for the things that they host.
And that I'm okay with, right? If it's something that's an existing crime in the land, you can argue about the validity of the law and try to change that law. But if it is a law in that country, then it should be abided by, I believe. But that's also why I think it should be a public utility. Section 230 is the act that provides them the protections that they get for not being responsible as part of the Communication Decency Act of 1996. So that's where they get the protection from. It essentially gives them Good Samaritan protection from civil liability for operators of interactive computer services in good faith removal or moderation of third-party material they deem obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, or harassing, or otherwise objectionable. Which whether or not such material is constitutionally protected. So that's the issue I have with 230 is whether or not material is constitutionally protected. I think that constitutionally protected speech in these platforms in which the vast majority of Americans get their news and media from, I don't think you should be able to infringe on that free speech. Again, I see it more as a town square than I do as a public business.
So just as a quick follow-up for my own understanding, and this isn't, this is maybe a little bit off topic, but how do you feel about moderation of content on something like Reddit or Twitch or Discord, right?
What do you mean?
So those platforms have moderators, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have terms of service, just like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of these people or companies.
Mm-hmm.
And those moderators go through and remove content when it violates those.
Yeah, so I think if we're talking about how I think it works now or how I think it should work, I want to clarify on that. Is this just how I think it should work?
I mean, I just want to know your feeling about how you feel about all of that, right? So
yeah, so I've already said that.
Same kind of thing with.
Yeah, I've already said that. So I think that constitutionally protected speech should be protected regardless. I think that you're entitled to your policies and those things as far as your agreed to conduct while on the platform. The difference that I see is basically the size, right? It always comes down to where do you put the line, right? Where do you draw that line in the sand to say this is this and that is that? And I don't know where that line would be. I don't know how many users they get, what percentage of Americans use each app, which percentage of them use it for what amount of time, which percentage of them, whatever the case may be. I think it's pretty clear that those key four get more traffic than any other media companies, bar none. YouTube being the biggest giant on the block. But I think it's pretty obvious. When you lay them out, Snapchat is of no competition to Facebook or to Twitter or to TikTok even. So I think putting them in the same basket is unfair.
I see where you're coming from. Now, if I understand your argument, you would say that all internet platforms should allow free speech based on how it is in the United States.
At least within the United States, yes. I think that if they can kowtow to Chinese government censorship, they can also kowtow to American freedom of speech.
Okay. Well, I do think that is probably quite an unrealistic ask for these companies, but I do understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of our problems are pretty large ones in modern times, but again, as you and I talked privately today, I don't think that means we shouldn't take them on. But back to what I was saying about Twitter. So there were multiple accusations of Trump and Republicans making a request for moderation. But multiple accusations. I said that right. But there's no evidence of those requests within any of the Twitter documents that we've seen. There's another point where Twitter received almost 3.5. It was $3,415,323 from the government for a program that was designed to process requests from the FBI for moderation. Now, that sounds really bad, and a lot of people I know that may or may not be listening would see that as gotcha. Like that, they obviously paid them to process these requests from the FBI, and where I think that's partially correct. The FBI should not be making those requests. They do it. All social media companies do that. They all have a department they have to run because the government is trying to overstep its bounds. This goes back to free speech absolutism. I don't think that the FBI should have any say in what goes on as far as free speech, right? I don't think that they should have any say as far as moderating content, as long as it fits within the free speech criteria currently outlined in United States law. Now, but it is a fact that Twitter did receive that money as a direct payment from the government for the program that processes those requests. Proof that the FBI has asked on so many occasions that they had to pay Twitter $3.5 million to process them all. Which, again, I think goes to the FBI tampering in this election. It also has overlap with that time frame. Obviously, with the fungibility of money, it'd be almost impossible to track which went to what, but nonetheless, it definitely occurred. And that's from an FBI filing as well as a Twitter file. So there's also proof of CENTCOM being whitelisted, a whitelisted account that was used to run influence campaigns in the Middle East. Again, this is not directly tied to the 2020 election, but I'm using it as proof that government has tampered in social media for their own gain, right? And that's obviously U.S.
I don't think that's necessarily going to come as a shock to most people.
No, but
especially when what I do think we kind of glossed over is that I remember hearing, I think, Facebook, maybe Mark Zuckerberg, talk about this kind of route for the government to come in with these requests earlier in the 2000s, and it was, if I recall correctly, mostly set up for things like anti-terrorism measures and threats to government officials and their families, that kind of thing. I do think that taking down misinformation is a newer type of request that just kind of came about.
COVID was the big one that's
in
spread
the last 8 years or so.
Yeah, so no, definitely did. And however, it has definitely evolved since then. This is a perfect example, I think, of the government receiving from the people, because that's inevitably who the power comes from in our governmental setup. Getting the power from the people to overstep traditional bounds. Once they get that first step through the door, they run all through the house. I think that's proof of that. I think the Patriot Act's proof of that. I think we have pretty substantial proof of the federal government overstepping their bounds on multiple occasions based off of an initial inch that we, the people, gave them. Back to your previous point, there was proof of government involvement in making multiple requests that were carried out by Twitter, moderating COVID-19 content. However, Twitter was better on COVID moderation than Facebook, where they typically would put a banner on. They did actually completely delete certain posts in the beginning, but then they moved pretty quickly to the banner system. I think part of that, obviously they did the wrong thing originally, but they did take corrective action pretty quickly. I think part of that was just the infrastructure wasn't in place to do that type of thing right away with banners. We'd never seen banners before that, right? So besides graphic content, which is another thing, I think if they get protections from graphic content just by putting that banner on, then I don't see how we can say that they are allowed to take down content for questioning political officials, which was a lot of what they did during COVID. I think that's another reason another way in which the social media companies and the governments colluded together to favor one political party over another. And that was evident based on reports that came. I wish I would have got this stat. I didn't think about it. I really need to soundboard these ideas so I can get more ideas to pull. But where there are numerous accounts on the right side of the aisle that have been taken down with a much smaller population of left-sided. This comes from that predominantly left-leaning employee base, resulting in a left-leaning bias. But it definitely negatively affected the right far more than the left, and I'll have to look that up and send it to you at a later date, just to prove that, because I'm sure there'll be a little pushback from that. That being said, I think that the moderation of the COVID-19 content obviously favored one side over the other. It also made it almost impossible to question government officials during that time of anything related to it. I think that, and Donald Trump is guilty of this as well, that a lot of the worst violation of our rights in the last 50 years happened during COVID. I think it's horrific. I would love to have this discussion at length over a couple of episodes, more than likely in the future. So I won't dig too far into it, even though every inkling of my body wants to. But I'll move on.
I will say just very quickly that I would like to highlight the fact that when they were trying this big COVID misinformation campaign and trying to get these social media companies on board with, what I would call, responsible moderation. It was focusing more on the health and safety aspect rather than the political aspect. And I think we can both agree that COVID became way more politicized than it should have been.
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that everyone should have been following health and safety guidelines all together on the same team, right?
I disagree with that, but continue.
We can debate the merits of that. That's my personal opinion. But if you look at it from a health and safety standpoint, I think it was clearly right down the middle. Now, if you're talking about
what was clearly right down the middle,
your moderation of content based on, is this harmful information or whatnot. And again, we can talk about that all later. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
If we're talking about constitutional rights, again, like we've talked about, these are not public utilities; they're private companies. So you're not violating.
Those weren't the particular.
Your First Amendment right.
Yes. So those weren't my
posts, but
those weren't my particular constitutional violations as far as COVID.
No. I understand what you're talking about with lockdowns and all of that.
Yeah,
but,
lockdowns, mask mandates, social violations, all that stuff.
Later.
So, the one thing I do want to say, and it sums up my feeling pretty well for the entire COVID pandemic, is that the famous Ben Franklin quote, right? Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So my whole view on that, and most of my political opinions, come from the first and foremost value that we should typically hold above all is liberty. I think liberty is one of the most important founding tenets of our country. Now, anything to rebut to that, or are we good to move on?
I mean, I think that's a good quote, and it definitely encapsulates the American spirit. And I would agree with you. If it went on for too long, you'd have revolts in the streets, as there should be.
Okay. So sorry to everybody if we got you all geared up for COVID talk. That's not what we're here for. So we're gonna push on.
Blue balling them.
Yep, gotta edge them out. Have them come back for next time. Good thing we put that explicit E on these podcasts, huh?
No, we can't hold our tongues. A
No.
sailor and a marine.
And not gonna happen. There's also the Virality Project, which worked with social media platforms to flag and suppress commentary on the COVID vaccines. This is from a quote. Commentary on COVID vaccines, science, and policy that contradicted public health officials' stances, even when that commentary was true. Which, as we look back at that, I'm not going to get too deep in that, actually. Never mind. I'm just going to finish with Twitter and move on to Facebook.
Oh, blue balling them again.
Yep. No, because that's another rabbit hole that I'm going to get into. So Facebook did markedly better. And there are multiple occurrences. I see now that I must have got sidetracked and didn't finish the Facebook slide, so I'm going kind of off memory for this one. But the first proof that we got that government was interfering with social media as far as moderation was Zuckerberg admitting on the Joe Rogan Experience that Facebook censored the Hunter Biden laptop story due to the FBI warnings of possible Russian misinformation campaigns, which we now see came out to be untrue. It was not. They never expressly said, in fairness to the FBI, they never expressly said that the laptop was disinformation. They just, gave one of those, hey, just so you know, something disinformation from Russia might be coming down the pipe. And we know how that goes. We've had this discussion on soft flexes of power before. I don't think we need to beat that dead horse too much. As for the story, for the laptop story, they limited how much the algorithm automatically shared the story, but they did not ban it outright. Facebook has also created the hallowed shadow bans on constituents on both sides. Again, they had a predominantly left-leaning employee base as well, so they tended to have a left-leaning bias on that also. Another thing that happened during this period is that they all kind of agreed with certain norms of the time, right? Everyone kind of agreed that what's his name, the crazy guy for the Sandy Hook liar, or Sandy Hook denier, God, what's his name, Alex Jones. They all banned him right away. I think that was more related to the Sandy Hook thing than it was to anything else, but they followed. A lot of people throttled the viewership of a lot of conservative political commentators and news broadcasters, which has come out to be proven as true through both Mark Zuckerberg and the Twitter files. That being said, Zuckerberg also just had a letter to Speaker Mike Johnson admitting to the same thing, showing the different ways in which the FBI did request and how the White House sent the White House itself, more than likely the administrative portion of the White House, not the president himself, but there is allegations of the president making requests himself, but nothing I could find that proved it definitively, of them trying to limit posts from certain political adversaries. So then we move on to YouTube. And YouTube has admitted to lagging behind in censorship decisions. That way their competitors take the heat. They came out and gave a briefing specifically saying that they didn't jump on people as quickly just so the opposition would take it. They did also, in that same briefing, say that they took down tens of thousands of videos alleging election fraud per their 2020 content policy. So that's where it comes into the question you asked me previously. Do I think that private platforms should be able to moderate based off of their policy? This is one of those instances, YouTube being the largest platform in the world, taking down tens of thousands of videos just alleging election fraud. This goes back all the way to what we said originally, where elections should be able to be challenged to show transparency within the government, and YouTube did not allow that. They did, however, end that policy in 2022, conveniently after most of the rhetoric for election fraud disappeared. I think that was, I said conveniently because I mean it. I think it was a convenient time for them to do that, and they should have never had that policy in the first place. But in fairness to YouTube, it wasn't a policy that nobody read and everyone agreed to. So I think they're okay. There's also evidence from YouTube showing that the White House pressured companies to censor information that did not violate their content moderation policies at the time. And multiple big tech companies agreed to that and have come out and said that as well. And it was mostly post the 2020 election. So a lot of them were taking down posts from election denial producers, people who put out and said it. Now we get into the one that I think was the big one, the Hunter Biden laptop story. And a lot of these have already been mentioned in the other one, so I'm just kind of breeze through them until we get to a new one. So FBI and DHS both warn of foreign interference leading to the moderation of the story that the New York Post posted. The sharing was blocked of the New York Post story, and the New York Post account was locked on Twitter due to the story as a direct result of that story. The Biden administration stated that they requested the removal of the story, admitting to them requesting the removal of the story, due to explicit photos of Hunter that were classified by Twitter and by the California state law as revenge porn. Now, I don't think that to be revenge porn at all. I think revenge porn is leaking your ex-girlfriend's nudes as a form of revenge, not releasing an entire laptop that happens to have some naked photos that the owner of the laptop put on there, and then subsequently left at a pawn shop. Or, sorry, computer repair shop. My apologies, that was a misspeak. The New York Post implied that Biden assisted assisted his son in Ukraine dealings, which was another strike against them, leading to the lock. There's another poll by, I have it in here somewhere. I should have recategorized this. By Technolot. It's got a really weird name. Technometrica Institute of Policy and Politics survey showed that 8 in 10 thought the cover-up changed the election, the cover-up of the story. It also, of the 2/3 of the polled Democrats, I think it was somewhere around 1,400 people were surveyed. I don't remember the exact number, but around that amount. I realize it's a small sample base, but one thing I wanted to say that I think really hits us home, as far as if we can't admit to it being rigged totally, at least in the scope of the public opinion, I think we can at least agree to fuckery. And that's because of 2/3 of the polled Democrats, they said they would have changed their vote had the laptop been confirmed as legitimate. Now, if we just do a little bit of math, I actually took a screenshot of the election results just for this conversation. And I'm going on the popular vote. The reason I'm doing that is because it's pretty consistent that the Electoral College favors Republicans because of the way it incorporates urban districts. It's literally what the Supreme Court is for, is to make sure that the flyover states still get a say in voicing, and that so New York and California don't run the political environment. So the popular vote tends to favor Republicans a little bit more than the popular vote does. Would you agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to make sure we're on equal footing on this. So there's 81 million. I'm going to write this down as we do it. 81,283,501 votes for Joe Biden. There was 74,223,975 votes for Donald Trump. Now, if we're going to come in here real quick, I'm doing this live because I wanted to show validity. If we take just the number that Joe Biden had, 81,283,501, minus Trump's number, 74,223,975, that gives us a difference of 7 million votes. You'd only need half of that to swing from one to the other in order to cancel out the whole. Do we agree to that?
Yes.
Okay. So that leaves the number at 3,532,736. We're going to add 1 just to push it over the 50-50 threshold. So that leaves us a total of 3,532,763 votes of difference, right? Of swinging, or spread, I think it's actually called. But now, if we take that 81,283,501 votes that Biden got. Obviously, it wasn't all Democrats, and I'm not using mathematician algorithms here. I'm just a fucking Marine doing hip pocket math right here. I think that obviously 1,400 people isn't a large enough sample size to take 2/3 as the designated fact. I'm going to bump it down to half of the Democrats. Right? Say they would have changed their vote. Obviously, I'm only taking 16% off, but wait, I'm not done. I'm going to then cut that in half again to 25% may have changed their vote based off of this, both for additional to that and for eliminating the margin of error within the study to get us to a more reasonable number. Obviously, you might not agree with going from 66% down to 25%. I thought it was a pretty, at least for thought experiment, a pretty generous estimation. We could even go down to 20%. I'd be okay with that to see kind of what that swing is. So, if we do that times 0.2, because 20% seems better to me, that still gives you 16 million votes that could have changed. So we needed 3.5 millions to swing it, and we got over 16 million of the people that voted. So this is where I see the big discrepancy through this story being the linchpin. All right, I see the discrepancy between people that did vote and people that could have changed their vote. Obviously, I've already addressed the polling size. I've addressed that it's probably not indicative across the board of everyone's opinion, but it does show that even if you shrink that number tiny down, you still blow out of the water the amount of votes that would have been needed to swing the popular vote. I feel like there's a rebuttal on back burner.
I can definitely understand where you're coming from with that argument. I do have 2 quick points to make on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One is that there is an AP News article, Associated Press, that covered a hearing last year with Twitter executives that said that they did, in fact, suppress the Hunter Biden laptop story, but not at the behest of the government. It was based on, internal decisions at Twitter. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Elon Musk himself refuted that, but this was prior to him, being in charge. So
it was prior to the Twitter files when the documentation of the FBI and the DHS warning of foreign interference less than 48 hours before the post was taken down.
What I'm saying is just take that with a grain of salt.
No, but what I'm saying is that the Twitter files that came out and proved that the FBI and the DHS were warning of foreign interference just before that post was brought down now discredits the employees of Twitter saying, nope, it was us, it wasn't the government. We have the actual emails that prove that the FBI did a soft flex of power in order to manipulate the companies into making that decision. And Zuckerberg admitted to that in the congressional letter to House Majority Leader Johnson.
I think we're on the same page here. So the FBI tipped off the social media companies that there was some, Russian disinformation about this thing, right? And then Twitter came out and said they made the internal decision to, kind of suppress that post or those posts, right? So now that does get into our previous discussion of should they or shouldn't they be able to do that. Personally, I think in our, in this capitalism world and these private companies, they should be able to do whatever the fuck they want with their platform, right?
That's a shift from something you said earlier, where you said I definitely agree that they should be a public utility. You didn't say that they should be a public utility. No. But I did not. You definitely agree. After I said they should be a public utility.
Okay, well, if I said those words, it was not in regard to that. I said I have never heard that take before, and it's definitely interesting. I thought it was very interesting coming from you.
Because it goes against my central liberty cause and my free market.
Because of your normal views on things.
No, I 100% agree that it's a weird one coming from me. I realize that.
So I can't say if I agree or disagree with that sentiment at this moment. There's a lot to think about there, and again, I think it's very complicated when it's a global company like that. But my point is that this wasn't a like a hard government pressure campaign to take down these things. Although I do.
Wait, I'll get to that.
Again, I do agree with you on that show of power kind of thing. Where just a police officer showing up at your door and asking you to do something in your mind becomes a lawful order because they're standing at your door as a police officer with a gun and a badge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of thing here, but we can talk about the merits of that all day, I'm sure. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the recent Republican-led inquiry into the Hunter Biden case, where the laptop has been analyzed and I believe forensically proven to be Hunter Biden's laptop, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't find anything of note with regard to that whole Ukraine situation.
So, and I'm okay with that. My argument with that, and I would actually have to look into that and review that to believe it wholesale, obviously. But for sake of argument in this specific conversation, that's fine. But we didn't know that at the time. My issue with it is that the government interfered with this story that has shown by polling data that in the poll 2/3, but even as low as if 5% of people change their vote based on that story, that would still give us more than the swing in the popular vote, then that would lead to a Trump victory.
Okay, yeah, and I can totally see that and understand that. My rebuttal to that is I almost guarantee that, you know, this question that we're talking about was probably phrased in the worst case scenario. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, if they have...
And that's why I'm
you know,
giving
their exact
66% down to
questionnaire.
5. I think that's pretty fair.
So what we're not saying that, you know, they asked these people, hey, what if all of these allegations were true, and, you know, there is a Biden crime family that's, you know, selling influence in foreign countries, and then that turned out to be true. We're saying
the question
hey, we have
that
this
it said-
laptop with incriminating evidence.
The question
Would it
that was
change your
stated...
vote if it turned out that it was this guy's laptop in the end?
So the question that they
regardless of
stated,
whether it
I'll give you
has
the whole quote
incriminating
just to clear up
evidence.
this whole conversation. The question was, would you have changed your vote had the laptop been confirmed as legitimate? So,
Okay, that still kind of leaves it pretty vague.
It does.
There was a lot of things that were alleged to be on that laptop that did not turn out to be on that laptop. Obviously, like we talked about, a folder full of dick pics was on there, but, you know, they sifted through, you know, tens of thousands of emails, and I guess they couldn't find any, you know, incriminating evidence, anything new that they didn't already know.
So October 14th is when the New York Post published the articles containing the Hunter laptop story. Now, October 14th, what is it? November 6th, is that the election date of the 2020?
Yeah, are you getting into
Timing.
like October surprise kind of thing?
Yeah, so it was October 14th, so less than a month before the election this happened. I think that's pretty brazen, especially for something that came out to be verified as authentic that they claimed was not. And that's why it was taken down. And to do that less than a month before the election, at minimum, is shady behavior. As to your, we can't prove that it would have been true thing, you're right. They didn't have enough time to prove that it was true, but they had even less time because the story was completely shoved down and suppressed throughout the entirety of the remainder of the election season. Which is why I think this was part of the linchpin of the rigging of that election, in the eyes of the public at least, in the court of public opinion, at bare minimum. And again, the poll says 2/3. I'm willing to bring that down to 5%. That still gives us a margin of over 500,000 votes over the popular vote swing that we previously came up with. So if 5% of the vote changed, which they, according to the survey, directly said, way more than that, directly said they would have, it could have changed the outcome of the election.
Now, just to add some depth to this argument here, right? Now, I see where you're coming from with those numbers. I just want to reiterate that, you know, I think you're coming at it from the point of view of these people may have changed their votes if all of these allegations were proven to be true, right? Because
No, that's not the case I'm
know-
making, because we couldn't prove those allegations to be true from the beginning, because it was only a month and it's taken years, and we just came to the conclusion, allegedly, again, I haven't looked into that investigation result, because I think the damage is already done, personally, but and I think it has no ramifications on anything current or future, seeing as Biden is really no longer operating as the actual president anymore. I think his staff is mostly handling that, and he's not running for next election, so it's really irrelevant at this point. The damage has already been done.
Okay, so what you're saying is, even if that story had run and it wasn't proven true, you think the election would have shook out about the same as it did?
No. So I think that laptop could not have been analyzed and all the stories come out in that month's time. I think that had they not suppressed that story, the election would be different. That's my take.
See, I tend to think that it would have been almost identical, regardless. I do think
what
that
evidence do you have to back that up?
The
is my
media,
question.
I do think that the media that people consume has an influence on, their political ideology and how, what their mindset is going into an election. But I tend to think, especially for 2016 and 2020, the independents were pretty much set going into those elections, right? And you weren't gonna. It was an incredibly polarized election cycle, as is this one, I think. And I don't think you were gonna flip a lot of the people that were set on voting for one party or the other.
I see what you're saying, but this is the thing about dirty politics, is we don't know how it would have gone had it been clean. And I think that at the very least, this evidence of just running the numbers can cast doubt into the legitimacy of that election. And I think
and I do see what you're saying, and
I think the election was empirically fair and everything was all good to go and everybody played on an even playing field. I think that's just blatantly untrue.
I tend to think that
I do have more. By the way,
you have to separate out kind of your ideas about whether or not the media can influence it versus was the election held free and fair, right? Because
I feel like I did that immediately.
Does have an influence.
The first thing I said about this was that I think that the administrative carrying out of the election was free and fair. I made that concession immediately.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Again,
and that's not the point I'm arguing to. Now I'm arguing to the point of blatant media bias, government interference within that media bias, and the government publishing information and putting out information that they knew was lies, whether they be current administrators or recent administrators or recent agents within the government, putting out lies to disprove an opposing political actor that they knew that information was false at the time of putting it out.
Yes, I can understand where you're coming from with that. Again, I think that the media does play an influence in shaping people's opinion. And people go both ways with...
So I see what you're saying as far as the media doesn't convince everyone. I see that, and I agree with you. But another thing that I will say to that is people absolutely come to their own opinion, and they might love Tucker Carlson, but they vote differently than him. They might love what's her name? She just did the debate with not the debate, the interview with Kamala Bush. I don't remember her first name. No, Dana Bash, sorry. But they're not going to vote the same way Dana Bash did. I get that. And I agree with that. However, most of them get their facts from those companies, from those media outlets, and then decide on those facts independently of those media companies. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, definitely.
And would you tend to agree with that most of us get our information from those media companies? I mean, that's literally sourcing articles is because we're getting them from a media outlet, right?
I honestly don't know how most people get their political information these days.
According to polling, it's usually Twitter.
Mostly from sources like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube.
That's typically what it is, which is why I included all of these. I would agree with you there. I think those social media campaigns are much more effective in reaching people than the Hunter Biden laptop story was a media campaign.
Your traditional news media.
This is what I'm saying. It was a media campaign, and I agree with you. that they are more influential than corporate media. But as far as what I'm saying to the, sorry, so you agreed with me that, fuck, I should have wrote that down.
I'll just say, kind of one last thing. We're getting a little close to our time here.
Yeah, and I got a couple more that I want to go through as well. Not a whole lot, but a little bit.
Okay, yeah. Let me just make this one last point then. I don't think October surprises have historically been very effective at all. And honestly, if we're talking about media influence in this way, the entire tradition and concept of an October surprise, I think, is pretty bullshit. Where it's literally trying to get the media to pick up a story that drags your opponent through the mud.
Mm-hmm.
It is the definition of trying to get media assisted votes, basically. So I don't think that those type of stories are super effective in getting people to switch their votes in general. Now, I can definitely see a little bit of influence coming from this, but again, I don't think it was going to be anywhere near the amount of votes needed in the places that were needed to flip the election.
So,
and that's just my
that's your opinion,
personal understanding of all this.
No, I get that. I remembered what we agreed upon earlier, and that was that people get their facts from the media and decide on them independently. And so what I want to bring that to is this was a fact of the election that the media lied about and gave a bad fact, similar to the Steele dossier, similar to the Mueller report, where they put out bad facts and people had to decide based off of those bad facts. And those bad facts were all leaked or requested by or warned by the federal government, with the exception of the Steele dossier, which was leaked by a British intelligence agent. Back to the Hunter Biden laptop story, to firm up the fact that government actors put this out as saying that it was essentially fact and giving credibility to this story being Russian disinformation, was the letter signed by 50 U.S. intelligence officials, including the CIA director John Brennan, who served as CIA director under both Obama and under Clinton. All said this all had the classic hallmarks of Russian disinformation, thus leaning credibility to this story being fake, that it wasn't Hunter Biden's laptop, thus not allowing the people to know about this and basically saying it was all bullshit. Which again leads to the people not being able to vote based on this fact because of direct government intervention. And then into the widely accepted that the FBI deliberately misled Congress with the laptop being misinformation. They did that in a couple of different addresses to Congress. But for sake of time, I don't want to get too deep into that one. You're more than welcome to ask a question about it if you like, but otherwise I'm going to keep pushing.
Go ahead.
Okay. So next I want to get into the Trump censorship. There's evidence of shadow banning within Twitter specifically. Twitter, again, was the worst as far as censorship goes for specifically Donald Trump, but also they're amongst the worst in censorship across the board. They were some of the first actors, right? So they took the brunt of the hit on this one. And according to the Twitter files, Trump was banned based on 2 tweets. I'm going to read these 2 tweets real quick just so we can all kind of get our opinion on. That way we know the facts of why he was banned, which happened pre-election, which is another thing that I think was, if not... This one I'm not tying to the government. I'm tying this one to the Twitter employees at the time, obviously having a bias one way or the other, and thus tainting information and facts that the populace then gets to vote according to. So the 2 tweets that Trump got banned based off of, the first one states, "To all those who have asked, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. And this is on the January 6th one. Oh, sorry, my apologies. He didn't get banned until after the election, but before the inauguration. My apologies. Another misspeak. The 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, America first, and make America great again, will have a giant voice long into the future. They will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form." Now, I don't see how those 2 tweets violate the Twitter standards at the time. Also, Twitter has come out and said since that they didn't, and they said in internal emails to each other that they couldn't find anything to pin him on, so that's what they picked. And obviously we all know that since Musk has unbanned him this year, blah, 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 but, different administration, different accountability, in my opinion. I can't hold a new owner to the accountable for the actions of the prior owner, is my opinion on that, but I guess you could say they're all the same company, right? So I think...
Yeah, so I had that pulled up kind of in preparation, that exact, Twitter post.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading that at the time and thinking that was a pretty, poor explanation of what they were doing, kind of grasping at straws there, because there was plenty of content that they could have pointed to.
I agree with that.
I will say most of it was probably sharing of other people's viewpoints and not him personally posting things, which is probably where they couldn't
pin him
pin
for
anything,
Yep.
Pin anything down. So, but when he's sharing other people's posts, saying all of these crazy things coming from the president of the United States, I can understand why they were trying to do that.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to say that I think Trump is a sore loser. I think he handled that loss like a little baby. But again, I don't think that there was no question of the election. I think there's definitely shady things that happen. A couple of things I want to go into just for anybody who may be listening. These next two things are ballot stuffing, ballot harvesting. Neither of them, I think, occurred to a margin that would have changed anything in the election as far as the results. So I'm going to do a definition at the beginning of each, and then I'm going to go through a couple of points, and then we're just going to move on. Stop me if you feel necessary. I don't think we're really going to disagree with any of these, but let me know if we do. The definition I'm using for this is ballot stuffing or ballot box stuffing is a form of electoral fraud in which a greater number of ballots are cast than the number of people who legitimately voted. I think that's a pretty easy one to get behind as far as definitions go. And this was commonly attributed to ballot drop boxes. There's videos of the same people putting multiple ballots into drop boxes on separate occasions that led a judge to rule in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that the primary votes could not be trusted. What you think of that is here or there, but that is a ruling that a judge did give that the primary votes could not be trusted. Also, multiple anecdotal videos of the same individuals frequenting ballot drop boxes. That's going to get into I'm going to touch back on that in the ballot harvesting, but we're going to push from here. There's also another incident of a Georgia water leak. I put that in quotes, that occurred 14 hours before the ballot counting video. There's a video, I don't know if you remember it, where people were walking out of the poll station that claimed it was done, and then afterwards the pollers, the ballot counters came out and said there was a drastic uptick of votes that were counted, typically predominantly in favor of the Democratic Party. A lot of those boxes were of open but uncounted ballots stored as volunteers thought they were closing for the night because of the leak, which originally came out, and I think Trump even said it was a water main leak. They blew the water main just to screw me. That's just not true. It was a urinal that had overflowed, that was leaking and overflowed, which caused them to box up a lot of the ballots, where there's two teams typically in ballot counting. There's cutters and then there's scanners, people who open the ballots and get them ready for the scanners, and then people who run them through the scanners. So that's a general setup of that. Obviously, there's supervisors, stuff like that, blah, blah, blah. But of those boxes that were found, quote-unquote, under the table, those were all open but yet uncounted ballots that they, again, stored because they thought they were going to have to come back after the leak was secured and then do it. But they ended up not... the scanners ended up saying through the night and just counting all those after the fact. So... I don't think that's proof of any wrongdoing. I think it was, hey, if the ground's wet, maybe box up the votes and put them on the top so they don't get damaged, right? Because if they did get damaged, then obviously people say, oh, they ruined Trump votes, and it would have been a whole thing. Of the states, swing states that they did a check for fraud in, there's fewer than 475 cases of voter fraud in those 6 battleground states. I'm going to list them off with the number of confirmed voter fraud after them. just so we can get an idea. Arizona had 198, Georgia had 64, Michigan 56, Nevada 98, Pennsylvania 26, and Wisconsin 31. Now, obviously, we have our magic number from before for the swing, 3,532,763. That's a much bigger number than 475. So, obviously, that didn't change the election. As for ballot harvesting is collecting completed absentee ballots from voters and delivering them to polling places or election offices. Only one state currently has only allows the voter to return the ballot. That's Alabama. 10 states are unspecified whether they allow ballot harvesting or not. The rest do in some form or another. They do have different requirements as far as who can do it in different states. Some states allow for a close personal friend or a family member to deliver them. Some allow for police officers to deliver them, oddly enough, or government officials, blah, 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 right? Some allow for political campaigns to come and collect and then deposit them in an approved site. One thing that I want to speak specifically to for ballot harvesting is that, like I just covered, it was legal in most districts. And Trump, multiple times, I have one quote in here that deterred Trump voters from voting using ballot harvesting. Trump also had minimal money spent on ballot harvesting. I think he stopped like halfway through the campaign, where Trump directly said, okay, people cheat. Mail ballots are a very dangerous thing for this country because they are cheaters. Obviously disincentivizing people from doing mail-in ballots, as well as doing absentee ballots as a whole, which are the ones that are collected. Obviously, they're not collecting your actual ballot. They're collecting an absentee ballot that you fill out, and then they take and put it in the ballot box for you. And I think that was, I would argue, Trump's biggest downfall. I think if he would have done more of that, he was more likely to win the election. I think that was his single biggest flaw in that election, as far as why he lost. I think him losing was of his own volition. Obviously, we've talked about the shadow cast on it, but I think that he is the reason that he lost because he refused to ballot harvest. Now, I personally think ballot harvesting is wrong for the most part. I think that mail-in ballots should be limited to people that are disabled, people that cannot physically get there, military members that are in a different location than their polling location, things of that nature. But I don't think that just average citizens should get mail-in ballots all the time. Now, I realize that's also tainted by the fact that it was during COVID, and so that affected it as well, which is why I think Trump should have, if he wanted to win, he should have hammered home ballot harvesting a lot more than he did. He definitely shouldn't have spoken directly against it. There's also cash for vote schemes alleged, particularly for multiple different candidates, particularly, though, for Representative Ilhan Omar out of, why am I blanking on this state? It's Minnesota. And Project Veritas has a story on it, but I found nothing concrete to corroborate that. It's just allegations that they were doing that the Democrats were paying people to vote for him. I've heard that argument quite a few times. I just haven't found anything concrete to corroborate. If someone has something like that, I'd be more than happy to take a look at it, but I didn't find anything. So that kind of wraps up where I'm at. The last thing I have is, was the election rigged? So this is the follow-up question where I'd like to see what your stance was. I didn't talk about foreign influence. I think you hit that pretty well. The only thing I will say to that is Russia is often blown out of proportion as for their efficacy of foreign influence. There are other countries that are much more effective, such as Iran or China, at foreign influence campaigns. I think Russia was, I don't know why Russia was picked as a bad guy, to be completely honest with you, but they have been ever since the Steele dossier. So I think it's just easier. Everyone already has that mentality in their head from, Trump was colluding with the Russians from the Steele dossier in their head. So it's easier to just keep Russia as the bad guy in that story, right? So I agree with you. All foreign countries do it. Russia has been proven to be less effective than multiple other countries. But they all do it, and I'm sure there's not a soul on this planet that convinced me that the American government doesn't do it in foreign elections. I think all countries do it, and I think it's shitty, but I also see how it could be beneficial for interests of the country. So now I want to get into, has your opinion changed? Do you think that there's any chance that there was some type of rigging? Obviously, I think we're both still in agreement that there was no administrative rigging.
Yeah, absolutely. So totally still holding fast on that one. I think it was a free and fair election. Now, I don't think my opinion has really changed, although I think I've fleshed it out a little bit. What I think we can both agree on is that the media does hold a lot of influence on, people in general. I don't want to say just young people, because it's old people, it's middle-aged people, it's all types of people. I mean, if you just look at Facebook, that's, the people getting their political news there tends to be either, younger, not teenagers, but, young 20s, and then older, I want to say, 40 to 60 is their other demographic, right? And then you have Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Those are all hitting your teens to 30s crowd, right? And those things are influential. And I do think that between foreign campaigns and I haven't brought this up until just now, but I think both parties are actually waging coordinated social media campaigns where they are, probably not directly doing this, but, paying some company for public outreach, you could say, and then those companies are making social media posts or, setting up bots to comment on places like Reddit and Instagram, TikTok, all of these things. And they're posing as real people just trying to, hawk a certain political view, right? Like, I just constantly see it, and it's on, like, unrelated topics and all kinds of stuff, just interjections from one side or the other. I really pretty much see it equally. A little more heavily on the liberal side, just based on the type of content that I consume when I'm not, out searching for political information. But I will say that I think that I can recognize that a little more easily, based on some of the discussions that we've had in the past, right? And I just become a little more aware of, like, this doesn't quite belong. I don't see people, saying this kind of thing in this type of forum, right? So I will leave you with this. I do think that all of these things that we talked about had some type of influence on the election. Now, I'm not convinced that it was enough that it would have swayed one way or the other, or if there was a different story that broke and got traction, pushed down, that it would have shifted to the other side. I don't know. I don't think that's possible to know. But I will agree with you that, again, media has a big influence on people's voting habits.
Okay, and I think my opinion mostly fleshed out as well. I still think there's points where we disagree with, and that's fine. I think that administratively, again, the election was free and fair. I didn't see any evidence of any laws being passed that changed that. I didn't see any policies that changed that within the administrative carrying out of the election. Nor did I see enough voter fraud to be able to prove anywhere even close to a reasonable doubt that it would have changed the election had that not occurred. That being said, I do think that media is one of the strongest drivers of what and how we think as a people, not only an American people, but as a global peoples. Because, as we said earlier, they're the ones that give us the facts to think about, right? And I think it's very evident at this point that the government is not only willing to, but actively did play with the facts I think is a generous way to say that. And was directly involved in content moderation on social media sites, where they're moderating free speech of Americans. And I think that is categorically wrong, and I think it's unconstitutional. They should not have any fingers, their dirty little grubby fingers, in any type of speech, whether it's on a private platform or a public forum. The freedom of speech should not be infringed by the government at all. And that's what they did, and there's evidence of that. Whether or not that would have changed the election, we'll never know.
And I can definitely get on board with that. I think that maintaining a free private media is very important to our country, free from government influence, and I think that the more regulations we place on the media, the worse it actually is for people in the end.
I think you could have gotten rid of the media, but yeah.
Again, I have some differing opinions when it comes to, like the midst of the COVID pandemic. But as I've admitted before, I have a little bit of cognitive dissonance over things like that, where, I've got two competing ideas in my head at the same time. So,
I think that's important to say too, because I think we all have a little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just perfect examples of me is them being a public utility and me also being a pretty libertarian guy.
Yeah. So I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes, and kind of talk it out, or try and think about which one wins you over a little bit more. But yeah, again, I think that freedom of the press is very important, and I tend to think that regulation on the media should be pretty light and relegated to, as we talked about earlier, kind of crimes. Like don't sponsor any type of violent or sexual crime type material on your platform. But I think we had a really good discussion. We agreed on a lot of points, and you definitely refreshed me and taught me a little bit of new stuff on all of this. And yeah, I kind of got a new point of view on some of that. I think we can definitely do a couple more episodes, kind of in the same series of events. We've got the January 6th topic. COVID is another one.
COVID's going to take a couple episodes.
Then the attempt of challenging the election by Donald Trump. We kind of both agreed that he has the right to do that, but that whole process and how that played out, I think we could definitely talk about that for an hour. So
yeah,
we're going on 2 hours with this one, so I think we'll wrap it up here. So any final thoughts, Drew?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we agreed about a lot. I hope I enlightened you to a couple of avenues you hadn't previously been down. Whether you agree with them or disagree with them, I hope I at least enlightened you to different topics to look at. But I think we're doing the important work of having these conversations. I think that if we can't talk about it, that's when it all goes to hell in a handbasket, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We can have differing opinions, but talking it out, it's all about love and discourse, right?
I 100% agree. I think we need to do this. I think this is healthy for the country, and I think it's what this country is founded for. I really do. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's important that like we do at the end of every podcast, as long as you're ready, I'm ready.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep doing this every week, and like always, I love you, Drew.
I love you too, buddy. You have a good one. Thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah.